Welcome to session 144 of the Bible in a Year commentary. If you started this series on the 1st of January, then today should be the 24th of May. Today we'll be looking at Job 20 to 23 and Psalm 139. But so far we've read through the prologue, the first round of speeches, and started the second round of speeches. We read as Job was exalted as a model example of a righteous man. God held court with his divine beings and heard reports, including the report of the Satan. Think of this as a job title rather than the big bad guy of the Bible. The Satan asked the question, was Job genuinely righteous and faithful? Was he just behaving that way because God was blessing him? So God puts this theory to the test, removing all of his blessings and favour from Job and leaving him alone and with a body full of sores. But despite all of this, Job doesn't sin or turn from God. He did, however, lament his situation, crying out that it would have been better if he hadn't been born, and asking God why he won't just let him die. To begin with, Job's friends chose to sit with him and mourn with him. But then they started to rebuke him, leading to the first round of speeches. Eliphaz starts off gentle, praising Job for his past wisdom and pointing out that God is just and punishes the wicked. Either Job is innocent and God will rescue him, or he is guilty and deserves what he gets. Bildad claims that Job's children must have been wicked and that's why they were punished. He argued that we can see that those close to God flourish and those far from him suffer. Zophar then jumped in to accuse Job of mocking God, saying that Job should be grateful because he deserves worse than what God is currently doing to him. Responding to them in turn and then as a whole, Job argued that he has every right to bring his case before God. God will do what he will do, and Job is willing to accept that, as long as he can speak to God himself. All these friends want to do is correct Job and hold on to the box that they've put God in. They don't want to comfort him or challenge their own assumptions about how God works. This started round 2 of speeches, where the friends get harsher. Eliphaz accused Job of not fearing God and being foolish. God is powerful and humans are abominable and corrupt, so God can do what he wants. Job accused Eliphaz in return, and then gave a long speech about how poorly God has treated him. Bildad then comes back to reiterate that God punishes wicked people because they choose to live apart from him. That must be why Job's children died and why he is suffering. Again, Job has no problem with God punishing him as long as God himself explains why. But let's jump in with today's reading, Job 20 to 23. At this point, Job's friends aren't bringing anything new. They're just trying harder and harder to justify their point of view to Job. Zophar starts with a speech on how the lives of the wicked are short, but Job has never denied that. In fact, he regularly complains that life is short. Next, in response to Job's question, why do some wicked people seem not to get punished, Zophar explains that God uses their own wickedness to destroy them, in the same way that someone may eat something sweet in their mouth, but it's poison when it hits their stomach. A wicked person may initially enjoy their wickedness, but it will ultimately be their downfall. At that point, the wicked person can no longer enjoy the fruits of their work, nor will they be able to pass it on to their children. Wicked people will never be satisfied, and so they will consume themselves in wanting more. And at the point when the wicked are fully confident in their own actions, that's when God will strike, with burning anger, arrows, and darkness. Their wickedness will be clear for everyone to see, and God will remove them. The frustrating thing about Zophar and many of the speeches from Job's friends is that there are elements that are true. God does use people's wickedness to destroy themselves. The problem is that they argue that these things are always the case, that God always punishes the wicked and always rescues the innocent. But we know that's not true. Sometimes wicked people never seem to be punished, and, as with Job, people who are innocent continue to suffer. This is the point at the centre of Job's response. Job first challenges the friends for their lack of compassion. Rather than comforting him, they mock him and revile him. Job points out that too often we see wicked people prosper. They live long and pass on their riches to their children. Their houses are safe and their livestock breed and multiply. They can sing and dance and enjoy life, and all the while they tell God that they don't need him. Job challenges a specific argument of his friends that says God stores up their iniquity for their children. That's Job 21 verse 19. He points out he's never actually seen that happen, and even if it were to happen, the wicked don't care what happens to their children after they die. Job argues that life seems to be so much more random than his friends are saying. Some die after a full and happy life at the peak of health, while others die in bitterness with their bodies wasting away. Job ends by asking his friends if they've ever just looked around at the world around them, or asked people questions. Because if they did, they'd see the foolishness of their arguments when they realise that there are plenty of wicked that go unpunished and then enjoy their lives. This finishes the second round of speeches and starts the third and final round. Eliphaz comes back, but unfortunately it's just more of what we've already heard. Job's friends are incapable of acknowledging anything that Job says, because it would mean they would have to rethink their entire theology. So instead, they ignore him and just continue to repeat their argument in different ways. Eliphaz accuses Job of challenging God and then once again labels him a sinner, saying, "Is not your evil abundant?" That's Job 22 verse 5. He makes up things that in his eyes Job must have done wrong, like not feeding the hungry and not helping the widow and the orphan. He challenges Job for asking God these questions, saying that he's as bad as the wicked who say they do not need God. Eliphaz ends by encouraging Job to turn and repent to God. If Job does, then surely God will restore him and bless him once more. This time, Job doesn't seem to bother to respond to Eliphaz, but is inspired by his speech. Job finds a fresh hope in seeking God. He changes his tone slightly, and now says that his issue isn't that God is refusing to answer him, but just that he's been unable to find God. He claims that if he could just come before God, then God would answer him and forgive him. Job points out that he has been looking for God, but wherever he goes, he cannot find him. But he does have this one confidence, that even though God has not been near, Job has never once stopped being obedient to God. Job has been faithful, and when he can eventually get before God, God will prove him right. But then Job once again recognises God's authority, and that if God has decided to punish Job for whatever reason, there's nothing that Job can do to change that. Because of this, as much as Job wants to come before God to declare his innocence, he's also terrified of doing so. The main strength of Job's arguments is their nuance. He can see all these different factors, God's authority and goodness, along with the wickedness of the world, and how sometimes it feels like bad things happen to good people, and vice versa. Seeing all of these things, Job is wrestling, trying to work out how they fit together. With Job's friends, though, there is no nuance. They would rather blatantly ignore the realities around them so that they can tie up their theology in a nice, neat bow. That is Job 20 to 23. Now let's look at Psalm 139. This psalm is attributed to King David and falls into the category of lament psalm, though it may not seem it at first. We've mentioned before that lament psalms are about bringing your complaint to God and asking him to do something, and then declaring your trust in him. This psalm spends the first 3/4 of the psalm declaring their trust in God and his great power. It's only in the last quarter that the psalmist brings their complaint and request. Here is a summary of the structure, but I would recommend checking out the written version of this commentary in the description to see the structure properly for yourself. But we start with verses 1 to 6, the Lord is all-knowing. Verses 7 to 12, the Lord is all-present. Verses 13 to 18, the Lord as creator. And then verses 19 to 24, vindicate me, O Lord. The psalmist starts by declaring that the Lord has searched them and knows them. Whatever the psalmist does or thinks, the Lord knows about it. Even before the psalmist says a word, the Lord knows what they're going to say. This means that the Lord can hem the psalmist in by guiding their steps and keeping them safe long before trouble is at hand. The idea of all this is almost too much for the psalmist. They can't quite comprehend how the Lord can know them so intimately. It may be that this knowledge scares the psalmist a little, but then they realise there's nothing they can do. There's nowhere they can run away from the Lord. The Lord is in the heavens and in the pits of Sheol. Sheol was the Old Testament understanding of where you go when you die. They could travel towards the morning in the east or to the farthest limits of the sea. For the Israelites, this was seen as the far side of the Mediterranean to the west. But the Lord would still be there, guiding them and leading them. Even if they hid somewhere really, really dark, the Lord can see in the dark just as well as the light. This leads the psalmist to think about how it was the Lord who created them. The Lord knows how all of their internal organs work because he was the one that knitted them together when the psalmist was in their mother's womb. The psalmist marvels at the Lord for being able to do that. The Lord saw everything that was going on in their mother's womb, and even then knew the full extent of the psalmist's life. Again, this idea is too much for the psalmist to think about or comprehend. And this finally leads the psalmists to their complaint and request. The psalmist is clearly surrounded by wicked people that oppose them and oppose God. The psalmist asks that God deal with their enemies. They point out to God that they've been loyal to him, hating those that God hates, and that those that turn away from God. The unspoken question is, if the psalmist is doing what they should be doing, why are they being persecuted like this? So the psalmist then ends with a request that God search them and point out anything that is wicked in them so that they can deal with it and live right. The psalmist's struggle is that they're surrounded by wicked people persecuting them and they don't know why. So they first build this logical understanding that God sees all and knows all, and then ask God to either deal with the problem or point out where they've misunderstood. This is an incredible prayer. It shows humility to recognise this seems wrong to me, but it may be that I'm missing something that God can see. This humility and teachability means that we can both ask for God to intervene with our problems, but also give him space to work on us if we're the problem. Thanks for joining us today. Take a moment to reflect on what you've read and share your thoughts or questions below. If you're watching in the future, then you can click here for the next session, or you can find the full playlist just down here. To receive these daily commentaries in your email inbox, subscribe via the link in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.